Humbug starts with kids playing in the pool being observed by someone in the shadows. Someone with gray and distorted skin like a zombie. But he's not a monster, he's just a guy who happens to have this condition of looking like a zombie. Great on Halloween, not so great the other 364 days of the year. Well, there's something else that is watching him now. Excuse me, I should say someone. If the start taught us nothing, it should be that we shouldn't jump to conclusions that the different among us are monsters.
Hell.
New policy, stay away from the freaks, stay away from the freaks! After the truth is out there, Mulder is looking into the case, explaining that the victim, Glazebrook, suffered from ichthyosis, which explains his skin, but that obviously isn't what killed him. It's this tearing into his torso. Mulder says that there's been cases like this all over the country going back years. The wounds, not the skin thing. With no commonality among the victims and no seeming motive for the act, and it doesn't fit the escalation normally seen with serial killers. So Mulder and Scully are going to Florida to investigate, especially since the killings down there have been increasing dramatically in recent years. So they start with the funeral. Take particular note of the minister.
Thou anointest my head with oil, my cup runneth over. Surely goodness and mercy shall follow me all the days of my life.
That's right. His vestments are purple when really they should be white.
Of a man who overcame the obstacle.
I like to think of it as DIY communion. Things get stranger. Apparently God doesn't want him back yet. Well, don't worry, this is not a case of the supernatural, and shockingly, it has nothing to do with aliens this time. This is an entirely terrestrial matter, I'm afraid. Actually rather literal in this case, because there's a man in the ground underneath this coffin. After the poor people remove the coffin, he rips out of the earth and then proceeds to, well, just watch.
Not having known the deceased personally, I'm in no position to perform a proper eulogy. I'm sure he was a nice guy, etc., etc. But as an admirer of the man's work, I am in a position to perform an impromptu tribute in his honor.
You might think that's in terrible taste, and you'd be right. But don't worry, he has even more bad ideas to share.
Namely, ramming this spike into my chest!
Crazy, don't you have any respect at all?
I think I hit my left ventricle! Get back, fascist!
And the crowd is rushing the field. Looks like the umpires are going to call this funeral a draw. Thank you for tuning in. A reminder that this funeral is the property of Major League Baseball and may not be rebroadcast. After they're done putting the fun in funeral, Mulder and Scully talk with the sheriff, who laments that his condition forced Glazebrook, an accomplished escape artist who could have been working huge venues, to have to work in the last of the sideshows in America. Scully thinks that might explain the killer, as this place is a vacation town for such performers.
A sideshow performer would have toured much of the country over the years, and their isolation from everyday society caused by their physical deformities could have built up pathological resentment so intense that murder might...
No, hold on a second. Around here, we refer to them as very special people.
That's actually derived from a book title, Very Special People, The Struggles, Loves, and Triumphs of Human Oddities. I suppose Very Special People is more polite than Human Oddities, though it does kind of seem a bit condescending, doesn't it? Still, I probably would prefer to be condescended to than called a freak or a mutant. Mulder notes a weird design on the menu here, so the sheriff takes him to meet Hepcath Helm, who runs the local funhouse. Not that you should call it that around him, as he's sensitive about that. He's an artist in the scaring the shit out of you business. Anyway, Mulder just wanted to ask about one of the illustrations, which Hepcath says is the Fiji Mermaid, an example of P.T. Barnum's Humbug. The Fiji Mermaid was a dead monkey sewed onto a fish body, but Mulder points out that the tracks seen at many of the murder scenes have tracks identified as possibly simian. So he wants to look around for the Fiji Mermaid, I guess. It's not like Mulder's a perfect detective, though.
Tell me, have you done much circus work in your life?
And what makes you think I've ever spectated a circus? much less being enslaved by one.
I know that many of the citizens here are former circus hands, and I just thought that maybe...
You thought that because I am a person of short stature, that the only career I could procure for myself would be one confined to the so-called big top. You took one quick look at me and decided that you could deduce my entire life.
By the way, Mulder and this guy have something in common. They were both on Twin Peaks. This is the guy who was dancing in the Red Room.
I've taken in your all-American features, your dour demeanor, your unimaginative necktie design, and concluded that you work for the government. An FBI agent.
This guy should be a detective too. Mr. Nutt is an advocate, convincing the guy who is now a bellhop, Lenny, to give up his showbiz career. That it was undignified to make a living having people gawk at the deformity of his undeveloped conjoined twin.
So now I carry other people's luggage.
I'm sure your mother would be proud. Well, while we're settling in, we see the same monster from the beginning in the window of Hepcath's place, and it attacks him. We don't get a good look, but we do get enough to see that it might be the Fiji mermaid that Mulder thinks might be the culprit. He does tend to be right, even when known facts and common sense says otherwise. In fact, the next day he sees something he probably thought, for a moment, was the Fiji mermaid. He and Scully are called to Hepcath's shop for that murder, where the blood on the outside of the window suggests a point of entry, but it doesn't make sense, bypassing the open door for an opening that a contortionist could only get through. Still, if you're looking for a contortionist who lacks common sense, we just have to go to that guy from the funeral. The trouble circus folk go to just to make a pot of coffee. This guy is Dr. Blockhead, though I have it on good authority that he only has a master's in hanging upside down in a straitjacket. A blockhead, in the circus sense, is someone who can pound nails into their noses. It takes advantage of the fact that there's actually no bone there to get in the way, so you're just piercing the flesh leaning to the back of the throat. Still gross, but everybody's got to make a living. Well, considering that this is part of my Halloween show, I'll elaborate, since the conundrum returns and is called a geek, because he'll eat anything. That's not a crack about nerds that will eat any kind of junk food. The job of geeks was to do something entertaining before they brought out the so-called freaks. They would do stuff like this, or they would do geek magic. Essentially, geek magic can really be divided into like two kinds of categories: illusions and stunts. The blockhead is a stunt because you are doing what it looks like you're doing. Just not to the same degree, because there's no skull bone back there, but it looks like you're pounding this thing right into your skull. Swallowing razor blades, on the other hand, that's an illusion. It's where you appear to swallow 3 razor blades one by one and then retrieve them with dental floss, but that is a trick. So the creepy thing about geek magic is that it's hard to tell whether you're seeing something that's actually happening or not. If we see a woman who's put in a box and the box is cut in half, or someone who's on a carpet and it's floating in the air, we know that's an illusion. No matter how real it might look, it's still just a trick. But geek magic, whether stunt or illusion, looks like something that actually could be happening. Like someone deliberately shoving a needle through their own arm. I'm not sure how much, if any, of this is even being faked, because Jim Rose, as in the Jim Rose Circus, and the Enigma, who played Dr. Blockhead and the Conundrum respectively, were performers in the sideshow, where the Enigma, an accomplished sword swallower since he was 15, would eat all kinds of stuff, and Jim Rose would pound a nail into his nose and escape from a straitjacket, among the many other things that he did. So while Mulder goes to have the blood from the scene checked against the nail that he pulled from Dr. Blockhead, Scully visits the Museum of Curiosities, where the curator shares information, a poster for the dog boy, and a genuine P.T. Barnum exhibit.
Barnum billed it as the great unknown. I must first ask of you 2 favors. Tell no soul what you witness in here.
And the second favor?
An additional donation of $5.
The phrase, "there's a sucker born every minute," has been attributed to P.T. Barnum. However, Barnum's biographer, Arthur H. Saxon, tried to track down when Barnum would have said such a thing and couldn't find any source that suggested he actually did. According to Saxon, There's no contemporary account of it, or even any suggestion that the word sucker was used in the derogatory sense in his day. Barnum was just not the type to disparage his patrons. But even if he didn't say it, I think that P.T. Barnum would at least get a chuckle at the thought of the P.T. Barnum legend continuing in this way. Speaking of which, what is it that Scully is going to find? That is an important lead, Scully. I have it on good authority that the truth is out there. That night, Mulder finds the cheerful motel owner, Mr. Nutt, under Scully's trailer, and is concerned that he might be trying to get some sexual satisfaction out of that.
I was merely repairing the plumbing on this unit. I know what you're thinking, my friend, but you are grossly mistaken. Just because I'm not of so-called average height does not mean I must receive my thrills vicariously.
Hey, I sympathize with your point and your frustration over stereotypes, but there's no so-called average when it comes to height. Math wasn't created just to annoy you specifically.
Not all women are attracted to overly tall, lanky men such as yourself. You'd be surprised how many women find my size intriguingly alluring.
And you'd be surprised how many men do as well.
For a guy so concerned about tolerance, he sure clammed up in a hurry. Well, at least Mulder has saved Scully's honor.
Oh, it's you. Is Mr. Nutt finished with the plumbing?
As Mulder and Scully compare notes, she reveals that Sheriff Hamilton's empathy for the VSP of their town is because he used to be the dog-faced boy. They do find him up to something strange, apparently hiding evidence. Evidence that he has warts because he rubbed a potato on his hand and buried it under a full moon. Elsewhere, Mr. Nutt has to deal with a conundrum, although he's here to pay the rent at least. But afterward, the monster arrives through the doggy door, and Lenny soon tells Scully about it. But Mulder's already there, finding embedded into Mr. Nutt's hand one of Dr. Blockhead's pins. Only we know that came from the check, but that obviously wasn't going to stop him from taking Blockhead into custody.
Mr. Swain, we're here to take you into custody to question you about some recent murders.
I don't answer any questions till I talk to my lawyer.
Who's your lawyer?
I represent myself.
He's the reason for that fool for a client saying. Meanwhile, Lenny has been thrown in the drunk tank, only to get a visit from the monster. Except he doesn't. It looks that way, but Lenny isn't horrified at what's coming in. He's horrified at what's going out. The monster, it's his undeveloped conjoined twin, Leonard. Lenny has known about this, but can't do anything about it without putting himself in prison too, as separation from him is a death sentence for Leonard. But Leonard has grown to hate his brother. It's possible that Leonard even fears for his own life because of Lenny's alcoholism. The curator told the story of the famous Chang and Eng conjoined twins, where the second brother died 2 hours after the first, and the cause of death, this is actually in the medical records, was listed as fear. Whatever the reason, Leonard's attacks have been misguided attempts to find another conjoined brother, so they have to stop it. Or him. Or it. I'm really not sure. So they follow into a funhouse. A real monster in a funhouse. That's a problem. They fail to catch him and the monster gets out, seeking out its next potential brother, the Conundrum. So Leonard attacks, but luckily for him, Mulder and Scully arrive and the creature is nowhere to be found. The Conundrum doesn't look so good afterwards, but he's not wounded, so it looks like he's survived the attack. But what happened to the monster? It didn't go back. It can't survive on its own. What could have happened?
What's the matter with your friend?
I don't know what his problem is. Maybe it's the Florida heat.
Hope it's nothing serious.
Probably something I ate.
Won't nobody help a naked man. Won't nobody help a naked man. Beware, beware, beware of the naked man. Beware, beware, beware of the naked man.
Humbug gets a stamp of strongly recommended. It's a wonderfully weird and funny tale, with great moments, and our real-life self-made freaks, as Dr. Blockhead describes themselves in the end of the episode monologue, add a great deal of punch to the episode. I particularly enjoyed the subtle commentary when Lenny goes to speak to Scully, and she's staring at his undeveloped twin, and he's staring at her breast. And they both realize what's happening and close their robes, both caught in a moment of shame for stealing a glimpse. The episode says, "Oh yes, you'll deny it, but at some point, everyone wants to sneak a peek at something they know they shouldn't." It means that, however much we might claim to be so much better than the patrons of the freak show in the old days were, there's a little bit of the naughty voyeur in all of us.